So when you think about it, unless there's some prenatal problems, birth is the first major challenge. And if you would have natural childbirth, you go through the uncomfortable experience, and then you reach kind of a successful resolution. So it leaves you with a kind of a cellular imprint of optimism. If difficulties come, I can cope with them. I've done one big job when I was being born. Of course, it's not conscious, but there's a cellular imprint of that I can really deal with difficulties. And if I stay there, there's a way out of this. Now, if there was heavy anesthesia, then you create an imprint, as it is called, the very early kind of learning, that if things get difficult, you go for drugs. That's the way out of a difficult situation. So I believe that a lot of the addiction is really created by, kind of excessive routine use of anesthesia, even in situations where it's not necessary. I mean, I am a medical background, so I know there are situations where you have to use anesthesia. There's no reason to use it sort of routinely. It's done, a lot of it for comfort of the obstetricians and the nurses and so on. Or they don't feel comfortable with women screaming and the drama of that. We have actually had experience when we worked with some obstetricians that they found out that they were attracted to that profession because they had some unresolved issues from their own early history, and those are then people who have low tolerance of watching the drama of birth, and they tend to handle it medically.
So you can say we're moving towards wholeness and healing with our physical body, and we're also doing on a psychological level. What about moving towards wholeness on a spiritual level?
In my experience, it's really very difficult to separate those two. In the old times, like in shamanism, there was no difference. I mean, spirituality and healing were sort of two sides of the same coin. Also, let's say, if you do see the Kalahari Bushmen doing a trance dance, it's a very spiritual event, but it's also a healing event. Or in ancient Greece, there were the temples of incubation, the temples of Asclepius, and so on. So this is a modern thing in the industrial civilization, that we have sort of priests and we have doctors, and they are sort of doing different things. So this came for me, as a tremendous surprise, because I did not have particularly religious background. There was some conflict in the history of our family. But when my father and my mother got together, and they fell in love in a small Czech town. They wanted to get married, and my mother was from a strictly Catholic family. My father's family didn't have a church affiliation, and the local church refused to marry them because my father was considered to be a pagan by their definition. And then my grandparents found this brilliant solution, which of course was a major financial donation to the church, and then they changed their rules. The wedding happened, and so the dream of my grandparents came true. They lived on Main Street across the church, so they could stop traffic, and they rolled out carpets, from the house to the altar, so that the guests could go from the altar right to the banquet in the house. And my parents got so upset by the situation, they decided they wouldn't commit me or my brother to any religion. And they said, we would choose our own way when we come of age. So I had no exposure to religion. Because I didn't have religion, I was excused from classes. We had actually classes for religion. And for me that was an hour of leisure. I would read a book or go for a walk, or if somewhere the people, kids were playing soccer, I would join them. So I'm a strange example of somebody who was brought to spirituality and mysticism through, clinical and laboratory work. Usually it's the other way. It is the other way around. So I had no religious preconceptions. I was really pretty much, I would say, atheistic, and it was in my own experiences, but also in the work with others. When I worked with patients, when we were trying to get to the core of their problems, we didn't find it in childhood and infancy, or we found something, but not the whole story. And it took us to the perinatal level, to the birth level, and then once the experiences reached the level of birth, then a new element, new quality came into the sessions, which Jung called numinosity. The experiences felt sacred. It was not, it was not interpretation. I mean, it was an experiential quality of that. Mm-hmm. It's like if you're watching black and white television and suddenly colors would come in, So this whole spiritual realm just opened up, already usually in connection with birth, but then there was beyond that, beneath that, there was a level that we now call transpersonal, where suddenly you had past life experiences, you had experiences of encounter with what's called archetypal beings, mm-hmm. Gods and goddesses of different cultures and so on. I worked with people who were Marxists, people who were positivistic scientists, cynics, skeptics, atheists, and so on. And once the self-knowledge, the self-exploration reached that level, they all would become spiritual. One aspect of it, this was process of healing, of therapy, but then at a certain point, all by itself, again, without any programming, actually to my surprise, it became a process of spiritual and philosophical quest. Mm-hmm. And, some of the most healing experiences were actually those that had spiritual quality. Mm-hmm. Experience of, oneness with the universe is extremely healing if it's properly supported and properly integrated. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, in our culture, people get diagnoses. And, I have seen situations where people had what in other cultures would be considered a very wonderful mystical experience, and they came home, and the family saw that they were very strange, and they called the ambulance, and they would get hospitalized mm-hmm. for that. Mm-hmm. Now Ramdas was used to be Richard Alpert. He was a Harvard professor who did some psychedelics, and this whole spiritual realm opened for him, and he went to the Himalayas and found a guru, Karoli Baba, and in that context we did a lot of meditation and a very powerful spiritual experience. And in that state he went down to the village to get some cookies, and he walked into the shop and got the cookies and wanted to pay, and the guy who was selling there looked into his eyes and says, "Not today, not in this special state. Here are the cookies." Mm-hmm. Namaste. Namaste. So in our culture this would have a very different ending.